Today we are going to look at adding and subtracting numerical fractions. The process of adding and subtracting numerical fractions requires knowledge of equivalent fractions and simplifying fractions. If we take a look at the question here, 2/5 plus 1/5, if you think about having 2/5 of a cake and then another fifth of a cake, you have, in the end, 3/5 of a cake. And imagine having 6/7 of a cake and then you ate 2/7. You would be left with 4/7 of a cake. Now, a third plus a quarter, this is the first time we've seen an example where the denominators are not the same. It is essential when adding and subtracting fractions that the denominators be the same. To make the denominators the same, we look for something called the lowest common multiple. So if we think about the 3 times table, you have 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, and so on. In the 4 times table, we have 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, and so on. If we look, we see that 12 is the first multiple that appears in both of these times tables. So we alter our fractions so that they become over 12. Now, we want to retain fractional value, so we want an equivalent fraction to 1/3, but we want it in twelfths. So we have to look at how did we get from 3 to 12? Well, we multiplied by 4. So then we have to do the same to the top of our fraction to retain the value. So this is 4/12. And then again, how did we get from 4 to 12? Well, we multiplied by 3. So then we have to do the same to the top to retain the value. Now we have matching denominators. We can add these fractions, and what we end up with is 7/12. And the same works for subtraction. The lowest common multiple of 5 and 7 is 35. So we want to rewrite both of these fractions so they are over 35. So how did I go from 5 to 35? I multiplied by 7. So 7 times 1 is 7. And then how did I go from 7 to 35? Well, I multiplied by 5. So again, 1 times 5, giving the top of 5. And then 7/5 minus 5/5 makes 2/5. Okay, what if we're not talking about a unitary fraction? What if part of our fraction is more than 1? How do we do those? Well, again, we're still looking for that lowest common multiple, and in this case it's 20. So both of these fractions are now over 20. Okay, so 4 times 5 makes 20, so we then have to multiply this by 5. So we get 15 over 20. And then 1 times 4, because we had 20. Okay, so now we have 15 20ths plus 4 20ths, so our final answer is 19 20ths. And then now we can do the same for subtraction. Now be careful here, the lowest common multiple of 6 and 4 is in fact 12. So we're going to put both of these fractions over 12. How did I go from 6 to 12? Well, I multiplied by 2, so I'm going to make sure that I multiply the top by 2. So that gives me 10. How did I go from 4 to 12? Well, I multiplied by 3, so then I've got to multiply by 3 here as well. So 10 over 12 minus 3 over 12 makes 7 over 12. Now, so far, we looked at fractions. But what if we have a mixed number? Okay, and a mixed number is made up of a whole number part and a fractional part. Okay. Okay, so we're now looking at a whole number, a mixed number. Again, we're still going to go through almost identical process. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add those whole numbers. So I'm going to get 3.5 plus 1/3. And then now what I'm going to look for is the lowest common multiple, which in this case is 6. So I'm going to rewrite both of these fractions so that they are over 6. Now 2 times 3 makes 6, so I've got to do 1 times 3 to get 3. And 2 times 3 makes 6, so I've got to do 1 times 2 to get 6. So I've got 3 3/6 plus 2/6, so I've got 3 5/6. And then let's look at subtraction. 3 2/5 minus 1 5/7. Okay, I'm going to do my subtraction. So I'm going to get 2 2/5 minus 5/7. My lowest common multiple is 35. So I got 2, and then I'm going to change both of my fractions so that they're over 35. 5 times 7 is 35, so I got to do 2 times 7 to get 14. And again, 5 times 7 is 35, so I got to do 5 times 5 to get 25. Okay, this is the first time we have come up with a situation where this part of the fraction is smaller than this part of the question. How am I going to deal with this? Well, luckily, I have whole numbers. So rather than having 2 and 14/35, I'm going to rewrite this so that I have 1 and 49/35. And if you look in there, in that 49/35, I have 1 whole plus the 14. And that's how I'm able to drop down to 1 here. And then I'm going to minus 25 over 35. And that's going to give me a final answer of 1/24 over 35. Okay, and in the last section of vocabulary, some of them we might not have heard before. We got our lowest common multiple, an equivalent fraction, a mixed number, and an improper fraction. And an improper fraction will become necessary when we look at multiplying and dividing.